My name is Cathy Scuffil, DCC's Historian in Residence for Dublin South Central. In the past few months, myself and my good friend Liz Gillis have been looking at how this part of Dublin was affected during our revolution. In this episode, we're going to look at 4 housing developments that took place during those troubled times. The early years of the 20th century were a time of great change in Ireland. Ireland would break away from Great Britain and inspire other countries to do so. But what was life like for the people of Dublin 8 at this time? How were they affected by the revolution? What were their living and working conditions like? And why was there a need for intensive social housing development in this area at that time? With the collapse of tenements in Dublin's Church Street in 1913, with fatal consequences, pressure grew on authorities to address the chronic housing conditions that existed in Dublin at the time. The provision of new and refurbished housing almost halted by the beginning of World War I, despite a £4 million offer from His Majesty's Treasury towards housing, which it was considered would serve to, quote, encourage conscription in Dublin. The failure of this offer to materialise was exacerbated by the need to rebuild the destroyed city centre following the 1916 Rising. A survey carried out by a housing committee in early 1918 showed just how bad the housing situation was in the city. Almost 90,000 people lived in slums considered unfit for human habitation. Almost 20,000 families lived in one-roomed tenements. Disease was rampant and there were very high mortality rates, especially among the young. Shocked by what they discovered, the Housing Committee decided to build a series of small social housing developments, despite the ongoing events of World War I. Members of the Housing Committee included Committee Chairman Alderman Thomas or Tom Kelly, a popular Sinn Féin councillor who had been imprisoned following the Rising, Alfie Byrne, later to be Lord Mayor of Dublin, and W.T. Cosgrave, a rising veteran and future president of the Executive Council of the Irish Free State, who was also from James's Street. And where they chose to build these 4 developments was right here in Dublin 8. Spitalfields was once a very prosperous place. Itself, Carmen's Hall and nearby Francis Street were at the heart of the then fashionable city. Traders included boot, brogue and clay pipe making. There were silk and poplin weavers. There were traders in every house, in every location in this area. But by 1840, the whole area was in decline. It all started with the destruction of the Irish Parliament in 1801, a reeling blow for Dublin. The politicians and upper classes left, their grand homes becoming tenements. Every subsequent decade had seen the wiping out of local manufacturing industries. 40 years later, a huge number of Dubliners had a meagre existence and lived in poor quality housing or rooms. Some social housing development had taken place in the Liberties in the late 1800s, but it wasn't enough. More was needed. Finding it difficult to obtain funding, Alderman Kelly proposed applying for, quote, an American loan in order to proceed with house building. He didn't know if he'd get the loan, but it shook the authorities into giving him money to proceed with his plans.
Of the 4 areas, Spitalfields was the only one requiring clear and build. That was the removal of existing poor quality tenement buildings and the replacement with new ones.
In April 1917, the Evening Herald announced that £100,000 had been made available for the 4 identified developments. It also carried an additional comment. The only scheme of the 4 that there is a particular objection to by a large section of the public is Spitalfields schemes in the Francis Street district, adding that the scheme embraces a lot of slum property. It was discovered that some councillors on the corporation were the owners of the properties in question. The Freeman's Journal of the 28th of April 1918 announced that the tender to proceed with the development of the first phase of houses in the Spitalfields area was accepted. The successful bidders were Messrs J&M Clark, Upper Clonbrassil Street, Dublin. The continuing World War was creating shortages, with regular problems getting building materials. This had an unexpected advantage for Irish suppliers, with locally sourced wood and bricks being used in construction.
The houses finally opened in 1918. This was a time of great political change in Ireland. The first election in 10 years was being held. The names of the streets and the roads reflect those that were here before. We have Spitalfields, St Catherine's, as a nod to the local parish, Park Terrace and Ash Street. But meanwhile, the War of Independence gained momentum. We're here at St James's Walk, where a mixed scheme of 2-storey and single-storey cottages were built by Dublin Corporation at the same time as the Spitalfields development was taking place. This was a raised patch of ground, originally the towing path for the Grand Canal main line.
The site was considered most suitable due to its proximity to large employers such as Gillis, the distillery at Marrowbone Lane, and the Grand Canal headquarters. Dolphin's Barn bricks would be used in construction. When completed, the scheme would provide accommodation for 66 families, arranged around 4 different terraces. In an acknowledgement to the comments of Sir John Griffith during the development of Spitalfields, some houses at St James's Walk, facing the Grand Canal, had small front gardens, together with a shared kitchen garden for the entire estate on the west side of the scheme. The early drawings for St James's Walk indicated nameless new roads in the development, perhaps reflecting the heightened Irish political situation following the end of World War I. Dublin Corporation subsequently agreed to a 1916 tribute naming scheme for the completed development, resulting in Clark's Terrace for Thomas Clark, Colbert's Fort for Con Colbert, Mallon Avenue for Michael Mallon, and McCarthy Terrace for Captain Tom McCarthy, the commanding officer in Marrowbone Lane Distillery outpost during the 1916 Rising.
Here we are in the Mount Brown area of Dublin 8. The proposal to build 240 houses on this site, the McCaffrey estate, was first considered by Dublin Corporation in 1914. Work commenced on the construction of 202 houses on this site in 1919.
Dublin Corporation called on Mr. Thomas Joseph, or T.J. Byrne, an architect with radical views on raising standards for social housing, to plan the development. One key feature of Byrne's houses was a parlour as an individual retreat from the rest of the house, a feature that was to carry into most housing developments in the future Free State. Byrne also preferred to include an indoor toilet and bathroom. Large gardens were provided where possible to enable the future residents grow their own fruit and vegetables. By August 1919, only 80 houses were constructed, and some 2,000 applicants for the homes had been received. Completion was affected by industrial action and ongoing funding difficulties, as well as domestic issues related to the War of Independence. Like St James's Walk, the early plans for McCaffrey Estate did not include names for the roads.
Dublin Corporation again agreed a 1916 naming scheme for this estate, immediately renaming the entire estate Cantfort after Commandant Eamon Cant,
with individual roads being called after volunteers who had been killed in the South Dublin Union during the Rising. Included was Burke Place, named for Frank Gobbin Burke, stepbrother of W.T. Cosgrave, who had been killed in the second day of the Rising. The completed Cantfort estate has been described as a wonderfully intimate series of housing clusters, gardens and playgrounds, and is regarded as one of the finest examples of urban housing of its day.
The final and largest housing estate to be built at this time was the Fairbrothers Fields development, located between Dublin's South Circular Road and Cork Street. When completed, it would provide housing for 430 families.
This area had long associations with Huguenot weavers of the 17th century, reflected in the nearby Tenter Lane, an old access across the site, leading to the old Tenterhook fields, where the weavers stretched out their cloth to dry. The intention was to use a number of different building contractors to work on the entire project, each assigned a different section to complete. That is why there is such a mixed development of housing styles, each complementing the other, all with front and back gardens. There was also reserved space for a future school, a public park, and plans made to construct a new Roman Catholic church. As efforts continued to assist local employment during the early years of the Free State, construction companies were encouraged to buy locally produced products for any works undertaken. The nearby Dolphin's Barn Brick Company again provided bricks for the construction of 357 houses at the Fairbrothers Fields in 1922. Alderman Kelly was responsible for naming the roads of the Tenters. As we have seen, the initial developments incorporated street names relating to revolutionary figures with associations to the 1916 Rising. But those built in the initial years of Irish independence included names associated with the Celtic Revival. Roads were called after Clarence Mangan, Petrie, O'Donovan, O'Curry and Gilbert, to name but a few. The roads are tributes to historians, poets, with a nod to St Thomas's Abbey, and of course to Irish legend and folklore in Oscar Square, not Oscar Wilde. Kelly's overall intention of housing the people of Dublin and educating the youth is reflected in choosing the names as he did. Today, the original Fairbrothers Fields scheme and other adjacent houses are collectively known as the Tenters, a direct link back to the original use of the land in the area. Over 100 years ago, faced with a monumental task, our councillors, including some locals, decided to do what seemed impossible. War and revolution didn't stop them, and they succeeded in creating 4 social housing developments that put community at its heart.
Spitalfields, St James's Walk, the McCaffrey Estate and the houses here at Fairbrothers Fields were all built at a time of momentous change in Ireland. They saw the end of empire and the birth of a new nation. They bore witness to the revolution.